Welcome back. You're watching The World Today, broadcasting live on Channels Television. Rebels in South Sudan have denied a UN report that they killed hundreds of civilians after taking control of the oil hub Bentiu last week. Their spokesman, Brigadier Oang, said there was a security vacuum after government forces left the town. The UN said that civilians were killed along ethnic lines at a mosque, a church, and a hospital. But the rebels suggested that government forces and their allies could have been responsible in order to make the conflict appear as though it was a tribal war. More than 1 million people have been forced from their homes since the fighting broke out in December 2013, and the conflict pits President Salva Kiir, an ethnic Dinka, against his former Vice President Riek Machar from the Nuer community. Joining us now via Skype is the Voice of America's John Taza. He is the managing editor and co-host of South Sudan in Focus. Hello, John. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Now, despite the ceasefire deal that was signed, why has it been so difficult to implement it?
Well, the two parties have not, although the two parties signed a ceasefire agreement, they have not been implementing it. The government, right away after signing the ceasefire agreement, started attacking rebel positions. And the rebels, in return, also started attacking government positions. And of late, the rebels have really intensified their attacks on major key towns in South Sudan. Like earlier this week, they captured a major oil field in Bentiu in Unity State. So respecting the cessation of hostility has been a big challenge for the two sides.
Well, the SPLA spokesperson, Philip Agour, said that the crisis is basically political and not tribal. Is this true? Do you agree, and why?
Well, the war is not tribal in its sense because it started from a disagreement within the ruling Sudan People's Liberation Movement. Now, when President Salva Kiir and his former vice, Riek Machar, disagreed, definitely their supporters, who are Denka and Nuer, became divided and polarized at some point. And some few elements within the two camps took law into their hands and did sorts of revenge and, attacks on each other. But the reality of the whole situation is that this is not a tribal fighting, because in both Salva Kiir's camp and Riek Machar's camp, you get people from different other tribes represented. So when the international media says this is a tribal conflict or ethnic conflict, I don't think so, because a lot of South Sudanese who are involved in this don't come necessarily from the two tribes.
Now, what do you think the way forward is for South Sudan now that it appears that the foreign nationals are being singled out and killed?
The way forward for South Sudan right now is to put an end to the fighting, because as it is now, you cannot negotiate when people are fighting in the battlefield. It's not easy for the leaders or the parties to sit down and talk. The second thing is that there's a need for a national dialogue that will involve all South Sudanese to address the root causes of this conflict. Because as it is now, the whole society is polarized along political divide, along ethnic divide, along, other problems that are there in the country. But so the one way of uniting the country is bringing people together to address the root causes of the crisis and see what you can rally everybody behind.
Well, thanks a lot, John Taza, our colleague from The Voice of America, speaking about the Sudan crisis. Well, we're still in Africa. The Central African Republic is still on the boil as French peacekeepers have escorted a convoy of Muslims away from the threat of violence in the capital to a town effectively controlled by Muslim rebels. Almost all Muslims have fled Bangui since the Muslim Seleka rebels, who seized power in March in 2013, were forced to step aside in January. The United Nations has since reported a cleansing of Muslims from the country's west. Intercommunal violence has gripped Central African Republic since late 2012, when a battle for power degenerated into violence between Muslims and Christians that have forced about 1 million people from their homes.
Once again, Muslims in the Central African Republic are fleeing. About 100, mostly women and children, left the capital Bangui on Monday, taking only what they could carry. They fear attacks from the Christian anti-Balaka militia. While this group is destined for Bambari in the country's center, others could very well leave the country altogether. Almost 200,000 people have fled the country since December, and another 160,000 are expected to flee this year. A group of French troops escorted the refugees, but some anti-Balaka want to see all Muslims leave. As the convoys traveled through the country, there was no guarantee that these Muslims would return. So far, the 6,000 African and 2,000 French troops already there have failed to stop the violence. Another 12,000 troops will be deployed to the country in September as part of a UN peacekeeping mission.
And that brings us to the end of the world today. Thank you so much for watching the program. I am Adeshewa Josh, and Sports News is on next.